So Stella Villarmea, who's the lead with Brenda of the Philosophy of Birth Network, is going to give us a philosopher's perspective.
So hello. Thank you so much. Thank you to the previous speakers for being so sincere and so clear. And thank you everyone from whom I've learned so much, and many of them are in the room. So thank you very, very much. Talking after these amazing speakers who precede me, feel me inclined to engage into the conversations already. And it might be that what is important is what I heard, not what you said, as Alex was saying. So to prevent us from engaging into those kind of conversations, I am going to just follow this kind of airport pathway and land since I have this opportunity today. So I guess speaking in this seminar means that the philosopher's perspective can add something or can contribute something to what? To shared decision-making and values in childbirth. Really? How? So I would try to answer both the really and the how the philosopher's perspective can help or can try to help that shared decision-making and values are integrated in birth care. And to answer or to start with it, I am going to bring what Dr. Brenda Kelly and I once wrote. Shared decision-making is sometimes incorrectly interpreted as meaning that the decision has to be shared. It is important to remember that what is shared is the process of decision-making, not the decision itself. The final decision belongs to the patient and does not need to be shared. In my computer, I have shared decision-making not as a shortcut, and I have shared decision-making. So that decision-making, I know you are all English speakers, but with the hyphen it's even more clear what goes next to what. The shared is independent of the decision-making. And so that is what we try to say there. So why talking this way? Because we even call it here, remember, a manifesto for change. We were so bold, and yeah. In the sense that this manifesto for change speaks to the autonomy of women. The pregnant subject is imbued with the same rights and capacity around decision-making as the non-pregnant subject. They have a voice, and it is the professional's duty to hear it and act accordingly. So this idea that even if you are pregnant, even if you are in labor, you still have the same capacity around decision, in principle, about decision-making as if you were not. The theory is sound, we said, the aspiration laudable, but how achievable is shared decision-making on the front line of obstetrics and in the delivery room? To address this question, I will comment on the notion of values-based practice and on certain assumptions about female rationality and capacity that are key to shared decision-making in birth care. So, values in childbirth. At the Collaborating Center for Values-Based Practice, we say, value is everything that matters to you. What you want, what you prefer, what you fear. What you wish, what you anticipate, what you reject. Exploring the foundations of values-based practice brings a philosopher like me to reflect on the notion of value. Two remarks. One, about the shift of perspective from evidence-based practice to values-based practice. When you focus on evidence-based practice, you focus on facts, or more precisely, on what you hope you know about facts. However, when you pay attention to values-based practice, when you surround evidence and facts and knowledge with the depth, context provided by what matters to you, and you interpret as valuable, you're playing, thinking, acting, and living in a wholly richer territory, the territory of the soul. Let me use the notion soul as the Greeks used it, as what relates to phone, to the air that sounds, the air that makes sense, that is the words, the meaning, the language. Soul is related to what makes sense to us. But let me be clear, values convey meanings. When we focus on what is valuable to us, what is worth to us, we also focus on what is meaningful. We are dealing with our frameworks of thought, our language games, our lifestyles, our worldviews, our Weltanschauung. And here I want to emphasize that the shift in perspective to values-based practice is about keeping an eye, being mindful, concentrated, focused on a particular object of attention, what matters to the person. It might be to us, that person can be us, wherever we are that day in the structure. What is worth for her, for us? What is of value in her life? Second remark, what does it mean to say that something is valuable? How do we know that it is? What is it needed to know that something is valuable to me? Philosophers have related the knowledge of values to practical intelligence. That is, to the kind of intelligence, not so much of what there is, but what there ought to be. In this view, values are not things that are valued, but things that are worth valuing. So, completely different thing. Think of the difference between what it is and what it ought to be. Perhaps there are lies in the world, but that does not mean that the rule you ought not to lie does not apply to us. Perhaps we do not want, appreciate, prefer what is valuable, but that does not mean that it ought not to be wanted, appreciated, or preferred. Think of a beautiful statue, for example. Perhaps it is destroyed, a bomb falls, that's it. But that does not mean that the value, beauty in this case, is destroyed by that bomb. Similarly, we agree, values-based practice in birth care faces practical and organizational challenges, not to talk of this mental health related, etc., marriage or couple. But this does not mean that the value of paying attention to the values implied to integrating what matters to the patient is not worth pursuing. In fact, if we agree to the philosophical approach I have described, the values of values-based practice is independent of how or if we manage that it works. Indeed, many professionals are committed to make shared decision-making and values-based practice work well in birth care. Their joint practices are an answer to the really and the how, with whom I open my intervention. In some, values value, and shared decision-making is one of those values that value. The philosophy of birth, this network, is a project that some of us, Brenda, Kelly in the room, Ashok, Handa as director of the center, but some others who are not here, I think, like Sudan, Professor Sudan in midwifery, like Alex Cairns is also engaged, Luis Perkins, who is a midwife who couldn't be today here, Rebecca Granero, who is a PhD student who lives in Valencia, Rodante van der Waal, also midwife and philosopher. All of us are in the team, and many others have joined, and our motivation is that this shared decision-making and values-based practice becomes real and more frequent in birth care, so that through live and unplugged conversations, like the ones we are having today, we can bridge the silos, as I learned from Brenda to say in English, that have existed historically between women's health and philosophical thinking. So everyone is welcome, please join if you want, that's the marketing. Philosophy of birth. Birth matters matter, and they matter philosophically too. I work on the philosophy of birth, that is, I use the tools of philosophy to analyze representations and practices around childbirth. My thesis is that to reorient philosophical conversations towards birth, and specifically to the origin of our lives, in the female body, in the birthing body, produces a radical shift. Once we turn that shift, many of the tales about our origin become old tales. How to tell our tales? How to listen to the tales we choose to tell? How to talk about birthing philosophically? I would like to build creative thinking that informs and questions how we represent the birthing body mind when we attempt to give voice to experiences that are graphic, shocking, bloody, usually unseen, except for those in the room, and I would add mostly unheard. Are we already imagining a new language of birth? Can we philosophically represent and vindicate this new genealogy, which means logos of the genus, this new logos for genus? I defend that interpreting the visceral body in and with the philosophical discourse is possible, but what exactly is needed? Well, not only a philosophical interpretation of the visceral body, birthing body, but a vindication of that body and its language. For let's face it, giving birth has its language. Please bring to your minds the sounds of birthing women. Birthing women living and expressing their visceral bodies. You can even say visceral minds. For birthing women do not only bear children, they also bear language. The sounds of language, the sounds of labor are part of what I call the language of birth. The language of birth is, I defend, a bridge between culture and nature. Interpreting that language allows us to cross the boundaries between biology and society. But how do we interpret those sounds? And that depends on which sounds you picked. You have to pick. Do listen to some sounds, just some, and not at the same time. How do we interpret the sounds? How do we interpret the language of birth? Well, let me say it upfront. In relation to birth, to its language, hermeneutics, and politics, we seem to face the following dilemma. Are we to interpret labor as a process ruled only by the visceral body? If ruled by the visceral body, those sounds are just that, sounds, screams, cries. Or is there an alternative? Shall we construct it? A hint. It might be that those sounds have meaning, that they are phonemic, that they convey a sense, a connotation, a significance. The dilemma entails a danger, the danger that acknowledging or emphasizing the role of the visceral body in birth leads to diminish our rights in the birthing room. Let me explain. As you know, most of our social contract is based upon mental capacity or rationality. That is why conceiving the birthing body as a visceral body has its risks, for it may lead us then to quickly conclude that the birthing woman is not in capacity. While if we push instead the understanding of a birthing subject as a rational subject, we might be led to suppress what is characteristic of many birthing situations, that altered state of mind and body. The dilemma is then, either the birthing woman is taken to be in full capacity and therefore able to make, maintain, or change decisions, grant or not grant consent, and act as a full entitled agent, or she's taken to be in a special altered state of mind and body that puts her in a situation of non-capacity and perhaps non-agency in relation to decisions, informed consent, and full entitled citizenship. For me, the key to philosophize about birth is to bear in mind the dilemma and its risks, independently of what the national legal framework says, or the international legal framework says, on the conceptual realm. It seems to me that the exit to the dilemma is to acknowledge both the role that the birthing visceral body mind on the one hand and the rational in the sense of meaningful body mind on the other play during labor and childbirth. We should take it seriously that a woman giving birth stands on the boundary between nature and culture. We should avoid so much biological determinism as cultural determinism. How could narratives be constructed that place birth in this circle of physiological and significant action? Finding words to describe labor and childbirth, exploring a language of birth, is crucial to building conceptual and birth care models that take care of those giving birth and those being born. So let's do philosophy of birth. What do the birthing sounds, the sounds of labor, mean? what must happen previously for a birthing woman to enter in a state where she sounds this way. I would like to explore what the philosophical vindication of the birthing visceral body, this new logos for genos, as I like to call it, might look like. In my talk, vindicating points to what has not yet been granted, but it is fair to grant, also in birth. Birthing, vindicating a visceral body philosophically, implies acknowledging, one, that birth is related to our entrails, while we find other ways. Two, that such fact has not yet been properly understood or incorporated by philosophy. And what particularly would I vindicate? That childbirth is the founding moment of how society treats and understands human beings. Hence, studying childbirth matters not only for improving the conditions of people in labor, but also for understanding the innermost secret of the entire social order. I'm quoting someone who you don't like, you don't need forever. In this sense, philosophy can explore the language of birth because it can explore the systems of meanings out of which our tradition comes. Placing birth as a meaningful, significant action is what philosophy of birth is about. I hope looking at certain descriptions of the roots of action helps us to understand why I want to address the birthing body as a visceral body, not only because we birth with our entrails, of course, but also because birthing with our entrails means all of the following: birthing from the womb, the core, the insides, yes, but also precisely because it also means birthing with our brain. After all, the brain is also an internal organ of the body. In other words, we birth with our capacity, our reasoning skills, our cultural paths, our thoughts, our will, our intentions, our calculus, our volitions, desires, biographical decisions, and experiences. We birth with everything that matters to us, that is dear to us, that is our values. So the challenge is how to talk about the birthing visceral body while keeping the agency, that is, without introducing a loss of capacity, reasoning, or decision ability that might lead to a wrong model of birth care. Bearing in mind the dilemma and the risks, let's philosophize about birthing. Let's vindicate the visceral body philosophically. So, in what follows, I explain how we can protect birthing people's rights during childbirth. To this end, I focus on the capacity or rationality of a person in labor. Because the most enduring and probably most influential stereotype about laboring women is that people, of course, too, that they are not rational, that they behave irrationally. From this perspective, this is the stereotype someone was mentioning before, with other words, these stereotypes, the ginger, whatever. From this perspective, the debate on women's rationality, choices, and decision-making in childbirth is a present battlefield. At stake is nothing less than women's entitled to full citizenship. The paraphrasis, cry is a cry, is a cry, is a cry, helps me introduce an example of stereotypical bias thinking in the case of a woman in labor, the interpretation of her cry. A birthing woman's cry is considered non-rational behavior, a sign that she has lost control. However, it may be that a woman crying out during labor is being more either safe, rational, Aristotle would say prudent, than we think. Ultimately, perhaps her cry is premeditated. After all, a woman in labor is not a being from another world. She is keenly aware that our culture interprets her heart-rending cry as a paradigm for total loss of control. You only need to watch the films. Consequently, in our context, many women think carefully before releasing loud cries. It takes courage to emit the first cry, to try it out, see what happens, and if it seems good, to continue. But it may be simply that a birthing woman knows, and I emphasize knows, her cry will help her because she has learned, that guttural sounds emitted from one's throat open the birth canal. There is a direct connection between the muscles of the throat and those of the pelvis. An opera singer will use their pelvic floor to reach the highest or lowest notes. If this is the case, we need to start admitting that women may learn in antenatal classes or conversations that crying out may help them. When the moment arrives, they try it and it helps, so they continue. They choose, test, evaluate, and confirm. Why are we so reluctant to acknowledge what they do is rational? Ludwig Wittgenstein, a philosopher that we are very, very enthusiastic in exploring, explained that the meaning of a sign cannot be innately interpreted. It will come with also I know it's new language here. That the meaning of a sign cannot be innately interpreted. Rather, a sign needs the context of social practices to realize its meaning. Think of the color red. It does not mean anything without the context. It only means stop in a traffic light sequence under our driving law. If not, red does not mean stop. It means communist in other places. It means all kinds of things, depending. A cry during labor need not be any different. The cry is a sign of something. The patriarchal context interprets it as a lack of control, but the interpretative context may be different. We may read the guttural sound as a way of maintaining the rhythm of breathing and working through pain. Among humans, a cry can have many interpretations: an order, a limit, a lament, a vindication, relief, impact, a mantra, expression of pleasure, to mention a few. Why should the laboring cry not also be an intentional action that opens up an organ to facilitate entry to a unique existential space? Of course, there are contexts in which the birthing cry means something else, which is why it is so important to remember that the cry is a sign. A cry can, for example, signify that the birthing woman is expressing her fear or anxiety, her complaint, her protest, or it might be the way she asks for an epidural. There are other explanations too. Further on during labor, a cry might cease being rational behavior in the sense of being premeditated, a means towards an end or lend resource. With lack, at a certain point during labor, behavior which started for cultural reasons enters a distinct and interesting phase that I will refer to as physiological. I don't care the name. Once a woman has tested the virtues of her cry, once she is confident of its value and has used it to transition to the next stage of delivery, her scream might become something else. For example, a tool for navigation or concentration. Then her cry signals that everything is going well. She feels safe to land on planet Earth. This refers to entering another time zone, space, or even world during birth. In those contexts, screaming during labor does not mean being out of herself, but being truly in herself. Think of the soldiers on the battlefield. Initially, battle cries may be chants designed to motivate, then shouts to encourage speed. Later for focus, and finally the sound of the enemy being targeted. We would not routinely consider soldiers as behaving irrationally when they let out this final cry. We would be more inclined to think of their final sound as fulfilling a function, an appropriate means to achieve a desired end. Let us compare this with how easily, in some contexts, the birthing woman's sounds are taken to mean just one thing, that she has lost control or perhaps even her capacity. Or consider the way in which in some cultures the pain of grieving for lost ones or lost loved ones is signified by silent behavior when in public, remember? While in others, mourning is accompanied by or even requires heartbreaking screams and loud wails. Why are we more inclined to think of birthing language as less cultural than, say, mourning language? As humans, birthing women do the same things or similar to each other. However, the same scream has different meanings depending on one's prevailing culture, situation, lifestyle, language game, worldview, and who, where, when, and for what purpose the birthing scream is uttered. We must challenge the uniformity of birthing behavior to allow different and better interpretations in context. The scream of the laboring woman is tuned into a specific culture and context and should be interpreted within both. To reduce the multiplicity of meanings and applications of birthing sounds to a simplistic "she does not have capacity" is a sign of patriarchy. We need to address the multiplicity of voices on childbirth, their autonomy and their agency. And that is what it means to say that the birthing woman's cry is a sign, is a sign, is a sign. Let me finish now. That philosophy has so often taken death instead of birth as its existential foundation. I also laugh. It's related. There are parts of the world in academia where we don't care about death. But philosophy, we do too. That's a common. So that philosophy has often taken death instead of birth as its existential foundation is related in no small part to the absence of women from the canon of philosophy. It is up to us, feminist philosophers, to undertake a radically new meditation of birth, on birth, one that finally addresses the logos for genus displayed by the birthing subjects, authority, agency, and autonomy. And that's what I would like to devote my time. It follows a little bit. This is the publication with Brenda Kelly that I was talking about. And if you just move, please. More. Here. If anyone wants to join and be part of this great group that we are building up, please, please, please. We not only you are welcome, we need you. Thank you so much.